Hello and everybody, welcome. This is a quick little tutorial about how I approach drawing figures. Now, these figures here are going to be a bit more stylized, a bit more cartoony, a bit more exaggerated. I have, first off, some examples here. Now, a lot of this stuff I've learned over the years from drawing from comic books or drawing from Cartoon Network cartoons, things like that. So if you look close at this first figure here, we get kind of this big old Hulk figure. Actually, maybe even a little bit smaller than the Hulk. You can see that first layer under there, which I usually draw with a red. It just helps me to, I don't really know what it does. I just like drawing with the red. But I drop that opacity here, and what I've done on that first layer is do a really loose gesture drawing. Then I've gone back in with a darker one and kind of refined it a bit, but still left it loose, still left it cartoony, exaggerated. I'm not trying to make everything 100%, perfect to real life. Because at the end of the day, I am not making a photograph of something. I am creating something that is interesting to look at. I'm designing the figure, not copying the figure. So kind of did the same thing here. This is a skinnier guy, kind of more of a swashbuckler kind of character. Maybe he's like a Solomon Kane kind of figure. That is a buckle. You see how I got my knees are big here. I've got quite a change in shape between the upper body and the lower. We've got kind of this shape going on here. So planning your figures out, a good way to start, especially when you're learning, is to learn a skeleton like this. This is one that I've just kind of pieced together from different classes and references and training documentation over the years. Feel free to use this one if you want to. As you can see, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 heads. 6 heads is going to be kind of a standard height for a human. Keep in mind that's not a superhero. This is not going to be a height I would use for like Captain America if I was drawing Captain America. This is more like someone working in a convenience store at a gas station or something. If you're doing a superhero, add another head or two on there. Go to 7 or 8 because they are larger than life, right? If you're doing, somebody shorter or a child, of course you could start here. So moving on to arms. Arms are at first daunting and complex and then get infinitely easier once you learn or memorize 3 shapes and how they lay together. And that's going to be a sphere, a tube, a sphere, a tube, and a sphere. Now another thing you're going to see that I've done here is I have wireframed these shapes. I've done this to add more dimension to the drawing. If you look down here, I've taken this exact same wireframe sketch, this blocked out, messy sketch, dropped that opacity, and I've gone back in and I've started to combine things. I've thought about making what are separate shapes here into one shape. That's something to keep in mind. That's something that I struggled with for a long time was when you're drawing a figure, you're not drawing individual pieces that are stuck together like a puzzle. You're drawing an overall form, an overall shape. So what can happen if you focus too hard on these little parts and piecing them together like this, you're going to have a disjointed looking figure. It's going to look like separate pieces stuck together. And you don't want that. You want an overall form. Not even just in this arm, but think about the entire form. So one of the things that this wireframe helps us with here is you see I've added these, see right here, I've added these, skin folds, muscle striations kind of details, and they are following that wireframe. So that's going to help sell that 3-dimensional quality. Another thing I've done is when I first did this, I just roughly blocked out with this purple where my shadow might be. So this is kind of imagining that my light source is right here and it's casting. But then we have a rim light or a backlight right here. So that's kind of lighting up that side. So down here, I've kind of, and see, and I would even might add some more. Add that rim light back in here. We can even take out some of that boundary line because we don't always need a perfect line around everything. Kind of add to that. But I've added that in here, but I've also had it play with the shape of the muscles and the directions that they are going. Okay? So sphere, tube, sphere, tube, sphere. Once you get to a more advanced part with the hand, this is almost more of a soft square. But you'll get there eventually. All right, moving on to the chest. Now, I have to be honest, I really don't use this method. I did use it to help me in learning, but I feel that it ends up being a bit rigid for me. But you can think of the chest as blocks, as two different blocks. So this first one here is a complete front view. So you're not seeing anything behind. You're not seeing these edges, you know. It's completely facing you. Very simple. This one is that same shape, a little exaggerated. This might be a little large, but you know, this is to help illustrate the idea. You've got them stacked on top of each other. We've got a drop shadow, and we can actually see this plane here. So we can see multiple planes. Think about like 3D modeling, right? You're 3D modeling. And then the center line, they're not going to line up because this is forward. We're finding center there, and look at that direction change because of the dimensions. And then your shadow is just your magic cheat code to help sell this three-dimensional quality even better. So when I do chests, I don't really use this method anymore. I like to use a loose gesture. So this one, you know, I did a circle, did a circle. You know, I found my center line. I found where, you know, the pecs are, where the collarbone is, where the traps are. Rib cage ends back there. Stomach's a little smaller there. And that's essentially what I've done. Then I've gone back in. I dropped that opacity, gone back in, and kind of cleaned it up and simplified, and then also added the muscle details in there. Then added that just a basic shadow to kind of get an idea of where I might want my light source, which in this case might be like kind of over here. Also helps sell that three-dimensional quality. Now on this, you can continue to use your wireframe, and you can go even more detailed with it. Think about all the shapes in here. All the small shapes that are building it up. You see how each one of these, you can imagine that, you know, the pecs, they come towards you in space and they're rounded, and then they recede back towards the shoulders. Same with the ab muscles here. So you can use that as another cheat code to help sell dimension. All right, now on to legs. Legs are a lot like arms. I've always found legs a bit more difficult. A big part of that is because your legs contact the ground. Your legs bear a weight, and illustrating weight is difficult to do. Again, we have a sphere, a tube, a sphere, a tube. And now the foot is a bit more complex. You could say there's a sphere and a triangle, or you could say there's a sphere and a sphere, kind of a soft triangle. This is just one of those more complex shapes. You'll get there as you practice. You even see in some cartoons, they just do this. or just this, right? And then that's the leg. So we got our wireframe. You're not going to see the rest of this sphere because this sphere actually becomes part of the hip. So it becomes part of a larger shape. Now, a lot of these muscles in here, again, you know, I'm not referring to medical diagrams. I'm just, you know, what looks good, what looks interesting. What can I do to put in to follow these wireframe lines to help sell the three-dimensional quality of it? If you're doing, you know, not a naked leg, and most of the time you're not going to do a naked leg, you're going to have pants on it. What about this? You're wearing a pair of jeans. What about the seam on the jeans? We can use the seam from the jeans and then the folds from where it bunches up to help sell the 3 dimensions, right? So those fold lines can follow that wireframe. The seam line can follow the wireframe. Okay? All right, so if you've done all this, you're drawing these figures, you're drawing them, you know, you're boxing them out, you've got your dimension to them, right? They look 3-dimensional, but they look really stiff too. And that's going to happen as you're learning, as you're studying, you know, the more detailed, intricate parts of anatomy. It's going to stiffen up. So one way we can approach not stiffening up is with action lines. So these are just quick gestures. Each one of these drawings was maybe 10, 15 seconds, right? And if you look at the leg here, look at this shape. That's not a perfect leg shape. Wouldn't fly in a medical handbook, right? No. I'm using a trick that cartoonists have used for years and years, right? So you know the famous bouncing ball animation, the first animation you do? Well, if you do it like this, if you do it like that, technically the ball's moving, right? Technically it's moving, but it's not very interesting. There's no speed to it. There's no emotion to it. That's why animators use the squash. Squash and stretch. Is that realistic? No. Does your mind understand it though? Yes. As movement, yes. So squash and stretch. So I'm squashing these muscles. So if you think of a muscle, kind of a bundle of muscle here. Okay, so this is a bundle of muscle, right? That's where it like ties into the skeleton system, all that boring medical stuff. This can squash way out, stretch way out, squash way up, squash and stretch. So we're doing that with these forms. We're stretching. We're stacking and squashing, right? Makes it more dynamic. We're following kind of a key classical concept, figure drawing. It's having your contrapposto, or what that means is this line where the shoulders are is going one way, and this line where the hips are is going another way. So that immediately is going to make your figure more interesting and dynamic and less stiff. Going that way, going that way. This figure is a very simple gesture. Just lines. This one was, not even probably 10 seconds to draw. Just action line, action line, action line. Excuse me. So think about doing these from life or from photos. Put a movie on, put on Rocky or something. During the middle of a boxing match, pause it when there's action on screen, and then do 5 to 10 of these. Take 20 to 30 seconds. Only 20 to 30 seconds to draw that figure, and then move on to another figure. Eventually you'll get down to 10 to 15 seconds. Do that every day. Do it as your warm-up before you start drawing. Before you're going to work on a big piece, do these. Fill a sketchbook up of these. And then you'll get to a point where you're not looking at a moving figure to draw this. You're just pulling it out of your head. Okay? All right. I hope that was helpful. Get to drawing. I am Alien Cannonball. I've got stuff up on Instagram. I've got stuff up on DeviantArt. I've got stuff up on Blue Sky. I'm working on some illustrations for my children's book about a medieval frog on a grand adventure. Check out the stuff I've got coming up. More stuff coming soon. Thanks for watching.